attempt at introducing the hymn of the Pearl on the last occasion, and so I don't want to repeat anything that I have said, especially of an objective nature, of the nature of the scripture, where it comes from and so forth, because we have all looked at already. But let's just say very briefly that this scripture does have a very distinguished, however, a very distinguished history. And it has been enjoyed and served as a source of inspiration for a long, long time to many, and often not even necessarily of the Gnostic or esoteric disposition. I have known, and it's been reinforced by statements of people who are in the know recently, that even as lately as within the last 30, 40 years, in some Roman Catholic monasteries in the United States, the hymn of the Pearl, the Acts of Thomas themselves, which contains another very beautiful chapter, the Acts of Thomas themselves have served as a frequently utilized spiritual reading. So we can see a certain ecumenicity in the appreciation of this work throughout the ages, and as Hans Jonas, who one of the great pioneering Gnostic scholars earlier this century, who has an entire chapter, chapter 5 in his book, The Gnostic Religion, has stated, and I'm paraphrasing his words, that it is one of those scriptures which speaks to the reader immediately, and that before any explanation there arises a sympathetic understanding in the reader, and it's a wonderful inspiring work of that sort. Now, in the only other thing in that regard that I would like to mention at this point is that my reason for choosing once again this text as the basis of our contemplation and of our discussion is that in the present difficult time wherein we live, it appears to be, to me, of very, very great importance that we attempt to provide ourselves, or at least to reinforce perhaps such understanding as we already have, of a pattern of our existence, of our lives. The Germans have a word for everything, and several for others. You know, I love the German language. It's not really my native language, but it's one of my two native languages, because I was bilingual as a child, learning Hungarian and German at the same time. And the German has a technical term, Weltanschauung, which means view of the world. And there is a less frequently known variant of the same word, which speaks of the not only of our view of the world, but the view of our lives. And in order to survive the blows of outrageous fortune, which we are experiencing at the present time, and of course maybe hopefully not as concentrated a manner at other times in our lives, is to have assimilated or brought to consciousness within ourselves as much as possible, and to keep alive within ourselves a pattern, a plan, which is the pattern or the plan of our lives. And this is not an intellectual exercise. It is much more of a mystical and poetic exercise. And for this reason, really, the Hymn of the Pearl is in the nature of mystical poetry. Because that genre of literature tends to speak to a deeper side of ourselves, a more profound aspect of our psyche than anything else. When we contemplate, as I hope we will in due course, in a few weeks' time, when we contemplate the entirety of the Hymn of the Pearl, we see a magnificent pattern of a development. I know the New Age circles since the blessed 60s, which were really a fun time, and I kind of wish that they would replace the 2020 right now. But let's say since that time we have become aware, I think, increasingly of the need for a meaningful and orderly, and yet at the same time very inspiring and powerful pattern which we might discover in our lives. Now, humanity has always been seeking what in general and somewhat misleading terms often is called the meaning of life. And the great Gnostic poet, I'm sorry, not poet but prophet, the word is similar but not the same, Carl Jung has said that that's not a very correct word. There is no such thing as the meaning of life. There is only the meaning of my life. So there has to be the matter of a personal discovery of a plan, of a pattern that is no doubt universal, but which has a very direct, a very personal and inescapable individual application. And that is the kind of thing really that the Hymn of the Pearl is. Now, most of you were here a week ago, and you will recollect, or if you haven't, then I'll give you the book. Here is the book as the preacher said, and you can look at that particular pattern. The Hymn of the Pearl starts with the description of the existence of a youngster who introducing himself when I was just a little child in a realm of existence, in a world that's very different from the one that we experience here. And yet it is of very great importance, and certainly the author, whether he was St. Thomas or not, felt that it was of signal importance to start the great poem with that understanding and with that recognition. And that is what we might look at very, very briefly now. You know, it's very important to gain an insight, an awareness, a consciousness, not necessarily detailed, not necessarily highfalutin and scientific and biblical or whatever the case may be, but to gain an understanding and an insight into where we come from. Now, one of the problems is that if we don't have that, then by that lack of recognition, almost the rest of our attempted understanding of our lives goes awry. One facile expression that we could use is that if we don't come from anywhere, then we are not going anywhere either. And so it's of very, very great importance where we come from. And in this case, I am pretty much going to devote the remaining minutes before I turn them over to my guests and my friends to this issue. How important is it, and what does it really consist of, that you can have an awareness of where you come from? And on the one hand, I'm aware, of course, that this is, in many ways, and to most people, it is a difficult question. Because as far as the world is concerned, the physical world and its pundits, I don't know why that Indian word for a Brahmin, Pandit, has become part of the English language, but I guess it has. According to them, well, we just come from nature. We come from our parents. We come from the physical universe, which to me is the equivalent of saying that we come from nowhere. Because in terms of essential meaning, in terms of growth-producing, insight-producing meaning, the phenomena of the world, whether they are scientifically investigated or just otherwise observed, does not communicate any meaning. It is full of data, but meaning for our own lives is very, very difficult to derive therefrom. And so then you may ask, well, at this point in the story, how do we come to an apprehension, a meaningful apprehension of our real origins, of where we come from? And I would suggest that such apprehension is far less difficult than we imagine. What primarily needs to be done is that the direction and the focus of our vision, of the vision of our consciousness, has to be changed, has to be redirected. As long as we look to things outside of ourselves, and people outside of ourselves, and books outside of ourselves, whether they are Bibles or Qurans or whether they are even Hans Jonas, there the real origins will not be discovered. The real origin needs to be discovered not by extraverting, outwardly directing, projecting our consciousness, but rather to reverse that process and to bring the focus of our consciousness to an interior realm. And there too, a lot of spiritual disciplines have tried that. And for a variety of reasons, they have often been either partial or complete failures. I am a almost lifetime member of the Theosophical Society, and we are here in the building of the Theosophical Society. And I am a great admirer of the redoubtable Madame Blavatsky, who started all that. But let's say in the teachings of Theosophy, not in Blavatsky so much, but in others, we find an attempt to discover that eternal interior meaning, but it is expressed in external terms. What do I mean by that? In the 19th century, in every age has buzzwords. You've got to watch out for them. And then there was a buzzword called evolution, or as some of the fundamentalist preachers, whom I generally don't quote, that tend to pronounce it evolution. And under the influence of Charles Darwin and so forth, people got the idea that the important thing about life's journey is that we are evolving. Well, okay, if I look at my own life for a minute, I don't want to bore you with it, what have I evolved into? I have evolved into a gray-haired, skinny old guy. That's what I have evolved to. Is that something to be so terribly happy about? I don't think so. I mean, I have to take it because, as a friend of mine used to say, none of us mind, all of us mind getting old, but we prefer it to the alternative. But other than that, or if you want to look at the history of humanity, have we evolved on other Plato? Have we evolved on other Aristotle? No. Have we evolved on other Alexander the Great? No. No. We produced individual figures, but a real evolutionary progress in a profound sense is not really discernible. So you see, we seek these alleged statements of the meaning of life, but when it comes right down to it, they are not all that meaningful. And why is that? Because they all are expressed ultimately in external terms, in terms of the world, in terms of nature, in terms of what is out there. And so what do we need to do? We need to look within ourselves. We need to observe our vision. We need to observe our dreams. We need to particularly be affinitized to our intuition. And even if that occurs only to a slight extent and occasionally, it will give us disclosures about our origin. I got kind of personal last time, and I think I mentioned, or I should have, that as a tiny little child, almost as a newborn, I was very unhappy about coming into this world, and I knew doggone well that this is not where I belonged. And as time came on, I found various others that accede to that. But if we open ourselves to that possible disclosure, then we get intimations of a very strange kind. Strange because we don't often experience it, and therefore it is strange. And this is a disclosure that tells us that we belong into a realm of consciousness, into a kind of being and of existence that is extremely different from the present one, and one of the many ways in which it is important that it is full of marvel, that it is marvelous, that it is beautiful, that it is unimaginably wondrous. So much so that if we catch a glimpse of it only a few times in our lives, those glimpses will suffice to take us further and further and perhaps bring us closer to that reality from whence we have come. And that is why the little child, the as yet undeveloped spirit, who is described in the hymn of the Pearl, tells us that when he was there, he was an entirely different and in an absolutely glorious world, and that his parents, which are other than human parents, were there, and his parents were looking out for him, and eventually his parents, and this could be a she as well, because there is no indication of gender in the hymn of the Pearl. His parents, the child's parents eventually tell him, well, look, we have something for you to do. And he says, oh yeah, what is that? Well, we want you to leave here and go to a very different place. To go to the dark land. I mentioned Chem, Egypt last time. And you are going to be very far from us. You are not going to enjoy all the wonder and all the glory and the beauty and the love that you had here, and you're going to miss it, and it's going to be difficult for you. But they add to it, we are not just sending you because we want to exile you. We are not just sending you because we are bad parents who are disowning you. We are sending you for a purpose. And that's the next big step. The first step is, yes, we come from an unimaginable, different and wondrous condition. But the second is that we are not in such a condition right now, and we are not because we have heeded the command. We have heeded the advice of those superior to us and yet intimately related to us like a parent, to go and to fulfill a task. And that, of course, is one of the great mysteries of the poem, of the story. What is the task? I said, you have to go down into the land of Egypt, into the dark land, and you are going to encounter all kinds of difficulties there. But there, in a body of water, guarded by a roaring serpent, by a dragon serpent, there is a treasure. And in the story it is called the pearl. This pearl you have to somehow get away from the guardian serpent and bring it back to us. And when you brought it back to us, then you will be restored to your proper place, and everything that you had to relinquish, that you had to leave behind, the beauty, the glory, the kindness, the exaltation of your homeland will be given back to you. But you have to do this for us. And they also intimate that even though it might appear to you that you are alone, and isn't that the words of one of the American spirituals, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. So that the child here feels motherless and fatherless because which in itself is really a great symbol. Those who gave us, even physically, who gave us life, our parents. There are other parent principles who gave us and continue to give us a greater life, a spiritual life. And they are the ones who are sending us forth far from them in order to perform this strange task. Now the nature of that task, and we spoke about it a little bit and so on, that we will need more time for us to look into on the subsequent meetings. But there is something that we can do, and this I'm more or less going to conclude on that keynote. There is something that we can do in this world that can have very great consequences. There is something here, and we can find it, and we can get hold of it, and we can arrange for its future. And this is a treasure which even heaven does not have. This is something that is missing in the transcendental region, something that cannot be found in the kingdom of heaven, but it can be found somewhere else, in a place where you wouldn't expect it to be found, in a world that is just weird and crazy much of the time, and sick, like we can see nowadays, and that is full of powers and forces that are determined to push us around, to make us do things that we don't want to do, and keep us from doing things that we would like to do. And, really pretty weird world, a pretty weird place. And yet there is something hidden away in the waters, which of course Jungian psychology, which is never far from my mind, is it's in the unconscious, it's in the mind. But it is also guarded by a pretty awesome force that doesn't easily want to let go of it. But we are able to go there, we are able to bring it forth, and we are able then to take it back to the kingdom of glory and of wonder and of beauty and of love, and there complete the incompleteness of heaven. Now, isn't that an unbelievably wondrous task? This is the greatest act of heroism. We are potentially the heroes of heaven, the heroes that heaven employs to complete itself, to make the fullness even fuller that it is. And we can do that. We have been chosen to do that. And of course the child says, yes, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. And then the journey begins. And the journey is predicted as a descent, level by level by level. And at each level, we have to leave something behind. We leave behind our cloak, the robe of glory, just because it's so glorious that if we wore that robe on earth, people would become too aware of us and they might frustrate our task. All kinds of treasures we have to leave behind. We are being at least partially denuded of our true nature. And we go down into the world really a wounded being. But we have a task. And how that task is fulfilled and what the great obstacles are that stand in the way of that task, of that we will shall come later on. Now I have promised my two friends, and I have promised you to do something that's very difficult for me, and that's let anybody else speak. That's really difficult. So I am now going to call on my dear and longtime friend and associate Bishop Marshall from Portland, from the troubled city of Portland, to come and speak to us, and after that I will call on my good friend from Texas, the great owner of peacocks, to similarly speak. I know that both of them are teachers and lecturers of much standing. Right now, of course, there are difficulties, but Peter Reardon, even now in this difficult situation, and with the what do we call it? With the contemporary Halloween mask on his face, he speaks once a month at the most beautiful place. What is the name of the club again? Yes, the Austin Club, in Austin. Oh, if you ever want to see a beautiful place, that's it. And his speeches are worthy of the beauty of the place. So I just heard and saw a lecture of his, recorded lecture of his, and I must say it was one of the most complete and most informative talks on the esoteric tradition. But now first I will call on Stephen Marshall to add to our topic whatever he wishes, and I am sure that we will be well rewarded.
Thank you, Stefan, for this opportunity to address everyone here. And the hymn of the pearl is, or the hymn of the robe of glory is one that's very close to my heart, and that pretty much brings me to what I have to convey this evening, is that these are things that are written in our hearts in that fashion. And this is a story that its meaning comes from that. These are things that unfold through our lives in a way. The meaning of these various symbolic images, the pearl, the robe of glory, the royal household, the roaring serpent, all of these have layers and layers of meaning. And so the tendency to try to just nail it down to one thing doesn't allow it to work the way it's supposed to work. One has to have a certain flexibility with these things, and a kind of I call a light touch. You don't want to be grasping too firmly on these things. It tends to distort the meaning. And the other thing is to value. The pearl of great price is often what it is called, and so we need to value it. But in a sense that in our extroverted culture, we only value what is this instant blogging and social media. We only value what's out there. And we only value what the social media and the likes and all this other stuff. But these are things, these are insights, these are experiences that we need to treasure in our hearts. And this is where the real alchemy happens. This is where the fruits come forth from that. This is where the pearl is achieved. And in the Gospel of Philip, it says, it doesn't matter whether you anoint it with oil or it's in the dirt. It has its value and its owner at all times. And so this is We have a task, and it's an important one. And another thing I thought of was that sometimes it's useful to remind each other of the experiences that we've had in this regard, particularly at this particular time, because every time we're led back to that authenticity of ourselves and the message that we have received, and which is gradually meaning coming up for us and unfolding, that we can participate this with each other. The connection, the connection and freedom and all that is in the place where we came from, we need to somehow bring into our relationships with people here. And as we do that, one of the questions I thought of was, it's similar to what Dr. Jung asked Philemon. He says, I got all this visionary, all this revelation, what am I supposed to do with it? And Philemon answers, tend your own garden. And so that's, I think, also a very important message. Too often we go about and we say, we compare experiences, or we judge each other's experiences. The experiences that we have in this regard are both unique and universal. It's a universal pattern, but it comes in details a little different for each person. And so we need to have that, we don't want to lose the essential essence and theme by looking too closely at the details and comparing them and going, this one thing, and all this. So that's another really important thing as we approach this. And the more we can do that, then we'll find that we come to a really special knowledge of who we are and what we are to do in this world. And the more we can bring that into our dealings with each other and with situations, everything really is a little better. As we each bring these things to flower within our own hearts, we can change things. We can change ourselves, and then the pearl can be brought back. Yeah. Now I'll call on my good friend and priest from Austin, Texas, and he will speak now.
Well, hello everyone. I want to thank you, Bishop Heller, for the opportunity, and Bishop Marshall, as you said, this is such a powerful and amazing work of Gnostic sacred scripture. And one of the things when we're studying very meaningful documents from the past, especially relating to scripture, relating to the special keynotes that are not merely made up, is that there are, I would say, two courses of study. One is, if we have any way of knowing what the author's intent was, if we can kind of unpack all of the symbolic language that's there, and okay, in this context, from this point of view, in this period of time, in this time track, there is an upwelling of compacted symbols that the reader has the encounter with, that could be very, very powerful. Now, if we're dealing with the relating of an experience that is of a supernatural nature that people have themselves had, it's difficult to do that in language. And the most useful way of doing that is in very powerful images and types that tend to form in a story or a myth. And so when this is done, there becomes a second track that's essential. It's not merely enough to know that this person who, like you said, long ago lived, Aristotle and all these great people, they had these incredible experiences and thoughts. But that was a long time ago. They're not us. But really, they are us. It's an indictment, because the people who lived long ago, what did they do with a single human life? What can be achieved with a single consciousness? And that second tract is that we ourselves have to have our own experiences, and that the myth becomes a mnemonic device for remembering exactly who we are. And stories, particularly like this one that we're dealing with Hymn of the Pearl, or the Hymn of the Robe of Glory, is one of those that is meaning bestowing. That it is something that perhaps you can say, well, I've never had those kinds of experiences. But with the confrontation with this compacted symbols that's completely authentic, there's a part of you that remembers. There's a part of you that is so deep and is so starving this entire time for spiritual nourishment, having been fed the surface. So this is one of those kinds of scriptures. And I know I have personal friends who has been so meaningful to them, as it has been to me. And I would say that in a religious context, fundamentalist or state or kind of the mainstream religiosity, it does a job, and it does things like there's someone else who's got it figured out. That's one. That's comforting to know. Another thing is, I'm going to be okay. And, that maybe when I die, something else will go on, and I won't be annihilated. So from the mainstream point of view, that is enough. And maybe its virtue is that it kind of stops there. But there are lots of people that it's not enough. That to have a direct experience of the other world is essential. And those people, in whatever you want to call them, are essentially identical with those who wrote Gnostic sacred scripture. They wrote it because they themselves had gnosis. And the question is, well, why write it down? They wrote it down because it became imperative for them to share this experience. And I think that's just something that happens. In the mainstream ideas, it's what is important. It's moral rectitude, laws and rules, lots of dogma, lots of whatever you do, don't. But the Gnostic side of things are, those things are important, but from having a transformed consciousness, spontaneous rectitude is the result of that, because there's a responsibility having that. I have to share this thing that I have, that I know, that I am. I have to, the meaning that I have explored and have been able to find at the edges of lifting up the carpets. It's not enough for me to just go into a cave and think the deep thoughts. It becomes imperative for us to be helpful to others. And, this vision of the human being going down and becoming embodied, the little child, going down to the place that is darkness, that is filled with all kinds of iniquity, all kinds of thinking, and all kinds of pestilence, all kinds of judgments and concepts and ideas. There are many people who are manifesting that the version of the Hymn of the Pearl, the translation I like is the loud breathing serpent, right? So I think it's a fitting motif now for all of the people who are angry at all the mouth breathers, right? So and let's face it, there are many filters to our perception that keep us from having these kinds of experiences. And so one of the great ones is, the constant background noise and the static and all of the tumultuous, alienated blathering of this age. So we have all of the wisdom of the ages at our fingertips, and yet we find ourselves starving. So to go down to that place, the question, as the bishop has mentioned, that the first recognition is this is a place that is alien to our true essential nature. And that for some mysterious reason we have to put on, when we're here, what in the scriptures called the filthy garments of the Egyptians, right? That in order to be here, we have to put on robes of corruptibility. And in doing so, we find ourselves having to partake of their food. We find ourselves listening to the same radio stations, partaking of the same news feed, and all of those things. And, the states of consciousness that come from that are drunkenness, amnesia. And so in a sense, the child has come here. The child, like in the Arthurian legends, the one who is without any guile is the one that comes to this place that is full of con artistry and confidence games and all of these kinds of things. But that's the one that can pierce the veil, that can get through and find that grail that is hidden in that dark land. So this Egypt we find ourselves in, all of the indignities that we will suffer, it really requires a kind of guilelessness to be able to grow into the one that will complete the task. Because it's an incredible task. And so, it's measured in things like there's a treasure that's to be recovered. Who holds the treasure? That loud breathing serpent, right? That loud breathing serpent is out there, but also it's here. All of us have erected a gilded throne, the demiurge of condemnation, and is there, casting its gaze, and we have to do something about it. We have to, in the world, we have to come to this place to do the work. There's an opportunity here that we can't wait for Jesus to do it for us. We can't wait until we get to heaven. It has to be the opus for here. It is our work to be done. And, like Origen said, heaven is the poorer, even for not having the presence of Satan. Really wild. This is an early church father, that heaven's the poor for Satan. Even the darkest of the darkness, even the most corrupted, can be redeemed. And ultimately, this concept of the apokatastasis will occur. The completion of all completions will happen. And all will be one, and all will be good. So the pearl is not something that's in the earth. It's not something that is compacted and beaten up by gemstones, by all of the telluric entities and forces that are here. It is something that comes from an injury. It is something that was lost long ago. And the likelihood is that we, as the little child who's come down here, we're not the first. And this amnesia that we've suffered, probably we've suffered it before. We've come to bring a message of salvation and help. And yet the thing that awakens us is that we find, it could be terribly depressing, right? That we're in this terrible, inequitable condition. But that where we are from, our true parents have not abandoned us. But they love us, and they would not have us remain. And so they send the messenger. They send the great messenger there to awaken us again as a mnemonic device, to remember who we really are, to shake us out of that drunkenness and slumber, that we can go and do the work, to complete the opus. Because just as we in our lives are starving for the spiritual nourishment, again, we know that heaven is the poor without it. So the way the child completes the task, after being awakened. No time is wasted. He goes straight to the serpent, and he doesn't withdraw the flashing blade that to slay the long-haired chiefs, as in the Song of Moses. There's no sword of fire. He doesn't call up armies or sound the trumpet, but rather he sings the song of enchantment. It is a work of magic that must be done. And in doing so, at the same time, the serpent quiets down. The loud breathing stops, and the undulations of all of the turmoils of the world stop. It's also fulfilling the thing that the serpent needed the most, although it didn't even know it. And that when we are able to retrieve the pearl, we are able to reunite with our true selves. We're able to put on our true garment, and the twin soul, the twin self is reunited with who we are. And the part of us we couldn't bring here to this corruption is that reintegration occurs, that union out of the disparate, out of that descent into the binaries and the opposites. There's a union again. And then we return. So the pearl, I would say, and this is that second tract, and I'm speaking for myself. The way it has been so powerful to me has occurred is that, that pearl isn't just something that's coveted, like Smaug the dragon covets his treasure, but doesn't know why. We are not coveting. It's not some precious thing that it is the true version of ourselves, fully realized in some timeless dimension that's waiting for us to come into our own, to become whole, become the proper totality of who we've always meant to be, that we can be, almost in the Buddhist sense, overshadowed by that divine nature that we could not put on here. And so that task of completion, it requires wholeness. It requires putting aside and removing those filters of perception that keep us from knowing who we really are, that keep us from remembering our true task, keep us from being fascinated and enslaved in serving their Lord. Because, that's what this world is for. It wants to generate powers, to be places to exercise ambition, to rule, to dominate. And, that is a very limited and awful position to be under the thumb of. And we have to do something about it by not doing that to others. There are many people in our society right now who are, I think the bishop coined this term, psychic disciplinarians, right? Where it doesn't matter political or anything else. It's that you're no good because you have different concepts and ideas. And, that is not salvific. You're not going to be able to tear your way out of any kind of box or bag or prison house or anything else with those mental concepts. That the true salvation is a spiritual salvation. It's a true kind of wholeness that doesn't come from any of those kinds of embodying that sense of judgment and condemnation. That just leads to more and more misery and suffering and enslavement. And so I know we have to conclude here, but I'll just say this, that the kind of magic that's required for having Gnostic experience, well, it's a good question. It's a good question. If there are these mnemonic devices, if these ancient Gnostics came up with these things, we can have the encounter with the scriptures that are they're so meaning-bestowing and they're so enriching and can really alter consciousness. Probably that's the first step, because you don't have powerful magical experiences in mundane, angry, or difficult kinds of stages of consciousness. You have to be elevated. You have to be in a place where it could be better. And so I would say that the first thing for having a kind of Gnostic experience is to recognize that a magic work is being done in a qliphothic and negative sense against you at this point. There is that the breath of the serpent on the back of your neck, telling you you're no good and it won't work, and you should be cynical and be desperate and forget about it. And you have to be able to say, no, I am a king's son or a king's daughter. I am going to return at the right hand of our brother next in rank, and I will complete this task. And so just as in verse, in the magic of the West, rather than that of meditation, we have all of the senses incorporated. The beautiful light from the stained glass, the incredible smell of the incense, the taste, the feel of the infrasound in the organ, that these culmination and cultivation can overwhelm all of those negative images and the negative senses, because there are things that are very important and meaning bestowing that do not come from the senses. And so that's the first thing. It's to have our own experiences by realizing the place where we are is not our home. And that to have a kind of focusing and overwhelming of the senses and being prepared for the experience to come to us. And with that, I want to thank everyone for coming, and thank you for watching this video, and good night. Thank you.